Welcome back. The former British Prime Minister Tony Blair sitting in the balcony with us right now. It turns out he's going to put off his retirement, tackling a number of global issues. Nice to see you, Mr. Prime Minister.
Hi.
Let's talk about the foundation, the Tony Blair Faith Foundation. What is the intent?
The intent is to try and make sure that people of different religious faiths coexist together peacefully, that they work together, that religion becomes a source of reconciliation, not conflict.
This is uniquely applicable in the Middle East.
In the Middle East, it's probably, I think the major issue is, can you get people to get along together properly, or are they going to end up with religious extremism becoming a source of violence?
And as your experience as the envoy, the most recent work that you've done there, what kind of changes have you seen so far with that regard?
I think the interesting thing about the Middle East is that there are two competing visions for the Middle East. One is where they're developing a 21st century economy, and they want to bring their politics and their culture up to date with that economy, and that's a very positive and modern vision.
And young generations coming up.
Yeah, and you know, the majority of the population there is young, so that's very important. But the other vision, I'm afraid, is where that economic power gets used in support of a politics and culture that's very reactionary. So that's where the battle is going on.
So from a pragmatic standpoint, faced with that problem and the resources at your disposal, not just from the Faith Foundation, but from your role in the global society, having been a British Prime Minister, having access and capacity that you do, what would you recommend be the steps, forget the past even at this point, if you were to begin to take steps now to try to get to a better place in that part of the world, walk me through the first 2 or 3 steps that you would recommend.
The first step is to make sure that people are properly educated about each other's faith, because there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there. The second thing is to promote the people who are doing great work, to reconcile people, give them a platform as opposed to the extremists that use the new media and technology very effectively. And thirdly, show what faith can do, which is one of the things we're trying to do, is to make sure we support the Malaria No More campaign, which is about eradicating malaria in Africa. Many of the victims are Muslim, many of them are Christian. Get the faiths working together to eradicate the problem.
You've done so much in that regard, and we want to talk about what's happening around the world. We talk so much about economic issues, so I do want to switch to the economy for a moment on a global scale. We're seeing the world get richer, which is a very nice thing, and that's obviously enabling a lot of these advances in medicine, whether it's toward malaria or the other ills that we face globally. What are you seeing in terms of the recession or economic slowdown in the U.S. and the implications around the world? Is the UK or Europe in recession or a sharp slowdown as well right now?
Well, they're certainly facing a tougher economic climate. And I think the question for policymakers is, do we then sort of try and close ourselves off and protect ourselves against these, you know, global economic trends that are very difficult, or do we carry on opening our economy up? You know, are we free traders or protectionists and so on and so forth? And I think there it's very important to recognize that there are other parts of the world, because power is really shifting east the whole time, where there are tremendous opportunities if we're open to them. So I would kind of say we should be on the open side of the economic argument, not the closed side.
And then the place where policy and economy has recently converged to great fanfare, of course, has been in energy, and then ultimately climate and all the rest of the things that you're intimately familiar with. What do you think is the best thing that can be done? In other words, there's lots of things that should be and will be and ought to be. What do you think is the best thing that can be done, both on a policy level by governments and on a consumer level by individuals, and for that matter by the business operators, by capitalists, to rectify the energy problem?
I think the single most important thing is to get a global agreement on climate change, so that we set a clear direction for business, for people, for countries, that we're going to reduce our carbon dependence. And the key there is to get America and China in the same deal. Because otherwise what will happen is, even if America moves to low carbon, China is going to build, you know, as many power stations as the whole of Europe in the next 10 years or some such, you know. So as the Chinese and the Indian economies grow, how do we help them grow sustainably? You need a global deal for that. So that's what we're trying to put in place.
Would you be willing to try to broker yourself a deal between China and the U.S. so that you have the foundation for others to participate?
I mean, I'm doing some work with a group of people to try and put together the elements of that deal. I mean, all I can do, I'm out of office now, is just, you know,
think people still take your phone calls, I bet.
Well, so far.
He's doing quite a bit.
But you never know.
In retirement.
Yeah. But it's But, in the end, it's also important for energy security as well.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're facing $130 oil or whatever it is today, it's a pretty good reason for also making sure you're not dependent on importing sources of energy, sometimes from unstable parts of the world, but certainly with vastly volatile and fluctuating prices.
But to you, a China-U.S. deal is key for climate.
Absolutely key.
Starts there.
Because the whole point is that in economic terms, China has got to industrialize. It's got to do that for its people. It's got to move hundreds of millions of people from farming into industry.
Well, they have a real nut to crack. I mean, the air quality in China, as we know, it's just unbearable. Real quick on the policies that could be put in place here. Who has the best energy policy in terms of the candidates right now on the table?
Do you know something? I think the American presidential election is really interesting, but it's for you guys in America.
Oh, come on. Now you can't ring you're going to ring the closing bell. You have to oblige us some sort of comment.
No, I think it's what I absolutely mustn't do, not in any shape or form.
Let me ask you about sovereign wealth funds. So much money on the sidelines. We've spoken with a fair amount of managers of these funds, and there's all this debate about what their motives are. How do you see it? Should we be allowing sovereign wealth funds, government-owned funds, to come in and acquire, whether it's UK or US properties?
I think, provided they're coming in for business and commercial reasons.
Why not?
Why not? And also, at a time when liquidity is difficult in the western part of the world, the fact that this money, after all, that comes from our, from our purchase of oil, comes back into our economy, I think that's not a bad thing. But it's important, obviously, it's for reasons that are to do with genuine business opportunities.
None of us have any interest, honestly, in getting into the whole Scott McClellan-Bush commentary, but I am obliged to ask you the following question. From your perspective, did you ever feel that anything that was in the public domain of information about the war in Iraq, either today or at any time in the past, was any different from anything that you knew at this point in time or in the past?
Emphatically not. And the one thing I think, people can disagree violently with the decision in respect of Iraq, but I am absolutely sure that it was taken in good faith. Now, you can disagree with it, but I don't think we actually advanced the argument about what's happened or what to do now, which is actually the most important thing.
What to do now?
Well, I think we've got to build on the signs of stability that there are there. The Sunni population now sees Al-Qaeda as an enemy. That is a big advance. We've got to build on that and the stability that has come about there. And also, for the first time in 4 years, the British Defence Minister was actually in the middle of Basra. That's a big sign of change. Now, it's very fragile. It hangs in the balance, it's true. But when you're out there in the region the whole time, as I am, you see the fundamental forces at play. And really, it's important we do everything we can in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Palestine, anywhere in that region and beyond, to support those people who want a decent and peaceful life.
Understood. All the best with your foundation. It's the Tony Blair Faith Foundation. If you're interested to learn more about it, I'm sure you can find it online. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much for spending some time with us.
Thank you for joining us. We so appreciate it, Mr. Prime Minister. We'll see you soon. We know you have to get to ringing the closing bell in just a moment.
Don't screw it up.
Wrapping up this day. We got the Dow Industrials up 21 points with just about 5 minutes before the close right now.
All right, and then after the bell, first quarter earnings for the S&P 500 down about 2% on the year. Which sectors will hold up the best through the balance of the year? 5 months in, 7 months to go. The answer coming up on the closing bell.